In this video, you're going to learn how to use Vue 3 and Quasar 2 to create this beautiful counter app where we can increase the counter, decrease the counter, we can give our counter a name, we can tap and hold on these buttons to increase our counter quickly, we can reset our counter, and we can even swipe up or down anywhere in our app to increase or decrease the counter quickly. And if we close and restart the app, all of our data is maintained. We're going to get this running and working in a web browser and also create real apps which can be deployed to the various app stores or distributed online for iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows. And we're going to do all of this in around 30 minutes. If you're new here, my name's Danny. I'm an indie app developer and creator of Fudgit, the popular cross-platform app created with Quasar 2 and Vue 3, which you can download free from fudgit.com. And I also have a cheeky little discount code just for you. Just tap on discount code and use the code MAKEAPPS. Go to makeappsacademy.com to grab all of my courses individually at the best prices, or you can join the membership and access all of my past, present, and future courses and the Make Apps community. What is Quasar and how can we use it to quickly create an app for multiple platforms? Quasar is a framework for Vue 3, which boasts hundreds of material components, such as this button component, which can be used to create almost any app. It also includes tons of extras, such as plugins, which allow you to easily display dialogues, notifications, and loading screens. It has platform detection so that we can make our app look and behave differently on different platforms. But my favorite thing about Quasar is that we can create a Vue.js app with a single code base and deploy it to many different platforms. We can deploy it to the web as a single page application, a server-side rendered app, or a progressive web app. We can deploy it to a mobile app for Android or iOS using Cordova or Capacitor. And we can deploy it to a desktop app for Mac, Windows, and Linux using Electron. And these apps can actually be deployed to the various app stores and monetized using ads, in-app purchases, and subscriptions. So let's get started creating our first Quasar 2 app. Okay, let's jump over to quasar.dev, and we're going to jump to Getting Started, Installation, and Quasar CLI. The Quasar CLI allows us to create boilerplate Quasar apps, which we can then use to build our own apps from. So you do need to have Node.js installed, and you can grab that from nodejs.org. And once that's installed, we can then install Quasar. And there's a bunch of different package managers we can use, but I'm going to use npm. And we can use this command here to install the Quasar CLI. So I'm going to copy that and jump over to my terminal and paste that in. But I'm not going to run that because I already have it installed. But once that's installed, you can then run this command, npm init quasar, to create a new Quasar project. So I'm going to copy that and run that in my terminal. And I'm going to choose app with Quasar CLI. And for the project folder, I'm going to use quasar-counter. For the Quasar version, I'm going to use Quasar 2 and Vue 3, the latest and greatest. I'm going to choose JavaScript. And you can create Quasar apps with Vite or Webpack, but Vite is faster, so I'm going to choose that. For the package name, I'm going to use the default. And for the product name, I'm going to use Quasar Counter. For the description, I'm going to leave the default. And for the author, I'm going to enter my name. Component style, I'm going to choose Composition API with script setup. I'm going to choose Sass with SCSS. And for simplicity, I'm going to use spacebar to disable linting, although you might want to consider using that in your own projects, and hit enter. And install project dependencies, I'm going to choose yes. And it's finished creating our project. If we scroll up a bit, it says we can launch it by running Quasar dev. And if I jump over to Finder and my projects folder, I can see the folder that it's created here. So I'm going to drag that into VS Code. I'm going to open up the terminal and run Quasar dev. And we now see this default Quasar app running in the browser. Okay, I'm going to start by changing our app's primary color, which is currently this blue color that you see in the header. So in our project, I'm going to jump to source, CSS, and quasar.variables.scss. And we can change our color theme colors here. So I'm going to change the primary color to 004D40 and save that. And we now see the header change to this nice green color. And we're not going to need a header or a drawer for our app because it's just a single page app with no navigation needed. So let's remove those. So I'm going to jump to source, layouts, and main layout.view. This is our main layout file. And we can see our header here, this Q header component. I'm going to delete that. And we can see the drawer there. I'm going to select that and delete that. And I'm also going to delete our script setup section because we're not going to need any JavaScript in our layout file, and save that. And we now see those disappear. Let's give our app our primary background color. So I'm going to add a class to this Q layout component here, and I'll add a class of bg-primary, save that. And our app now has this background color. And if you want to learn about all the different colors and color classes, go to the Quasar docs, style and identity, and color palette. And I want to get our app looking good on mobile first. So I'm going to open up the Chrome DevTools, and I'm going to choose this iPhone 678 layout. Now let's find a nice background image for this app. So I'm going to jump to a site called pixabay.com, and I'm going to search for green abstract backdrop. And you can choose any image you want, but I'm going to scroll down to this one here. Click on that. Let's grab the 1921, click on download, and I'm going to browse to our project folder and then public, which is a folder where we can store images and stuff like that. And I'm going to save this as background.jpg. And we're going to use Quasar's image component to display this image on the page. So let's jump back to Quasar Dev and Docs and Components. And we'll scroll down to this image component. Let's scroll down to the basic example here. And I'm going to click on this View Source button and copy the code for this Q image component. And I'm going to paste this above this Q page container component, which is where all of our pages are displayed. And I'm going to remove these style and spinner color properties. And I'm going to hard code in the source. So I'll get rid of this colon. And everything in the public folder where we saved that image is immediately available to us. So I'm going to set the source to background.jpg. Let's save that. And we can now see that image on the page. But I want this to be absolutely positioned and to completely fill the page. So I'm going to add a couple of classes to this Q image component. I'm going to add fit to make it full width and full height, and absolute to make it absolutely positioned. And we can now see that image filling the entire screen. And you can learn more about positioning classes such as these in Quasar Docs, Style and Identity, and Positioning. Let's design our counter and buttons. So this page here, our default page, is in Source, Pages, and it's this index page.view. And I'm going to remove this image, which is this Quasar logo here. And I'm going to remove everything inside the script setup section and save that. And we now just have a blank page. Let's use some Quasar grid classes to lay out the elements on our page. And you can learn about the grid system and all the classes in the layout and grid section on the Quasar site. But I'm going to start by adding a row. So inside our page here, I'm going to add a div with a class of row and a class of full width to make this row stretch all the way across the page. And then within this row, I'm going to add 3 columns with a class of col. And I'm going to give each one of these columns a class of text center to center everything that's inside them. We're going to add 3 of these. And we're going to put our counter in the middle column so that it's in the middle of the page. So for now, I'm just going to put the number 23 in there. And the text is black. So I'm going to add a class to the QPage component of text-white to make sure everything on our page is white. And again, you can learn about all the color classes on the color palette page on the Quasar site. And I want to make our counter a bit bigger. So this column with the counter text, I'm going to add a class of text-h2 and save that. And you can find all of these typography classes on the typography page. Okay, let's add a button for increasing the counter in this 3rd column here. So I'm going to jump to the Quasar site. I'm going to jump down to buttons and button. We're going to jump down to the round buttons. Let's use this shopping cart button here. So I'm going to click on View Source and copy the markup for that first button. And I'll paste that inside this 3rd column. And I'm going to split the attributes using the split HTML attributes extension. Let's save that, see how it looks. And we can see the button there. And I'm going to remove this color prop to make the button transparent. And I want to change the icon to a plus icon. And in Quasar, we can use all of the material icons. So I'm just going to Google material icons and jump to the material symbols and icons page. I'm going to change this drop down to material icons. Let's search for add. And this icon looks good here. So I'm going to click on that. And this name that you see in this middle box here, we can just add straight to the icon prop for our button. So let's jump back to that Q button here, and we'll change the value of this icon prop to add. Save that, and we can now see an add button. If we jump back to the button page on the Quasar site and jump to the top, we can see the button API here with all of the different props we can use. If we jump to style, we have this size prop, which we can use to change the size of the button. By default, I think this is MD, medium, but I'm going to change this to XL, extra large. So if we jump to our button here and add this size prop and set this to XL and save that, we now have a much bigger increase counter button on the page. So let's copy this button and paste it into our first column to create our decrease counter button. And for the icon, I'm going to use one called remove to create this minus icon. And the buttons and the counter are not quite vertically aligned. So I'm going to add a class to our row here of items center, save that. And now everything is vertically aligned. Okay, let's add a reset button down at the bottom here. So after our first row here, I'm going to add another row, and I'm going to copy the add button, paste it into this row, save that. And the material icon I'm going to use is restart _ alt, save that. And we now have a nice little reset button. And let's add another row at the top above this first row that we created. And we'll add a field for editing the name here. So let's jump to the Quasar site, and we'll go to components and form components and input text field. And let's jump down to filled. And I'm going to use this one here with the placeholder. That's the 5th one down. So let's click on view source, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we want this one. So let's copy that. We'll stick this inside our row here, and I'm going to remove the vModel and the dense prop and the hint. And we'll set the placeholder to counter, save that, and we can see that field on the page. And the text is black and left aligned. And if we want to add classes to the underlying input in this Q input component, we can add a prop of input-class. And let's add a class of text-center to center the text, a class of text-h5 to make it a bit bigger, and a class of text-white to make the text white. And I'm also going to add a color prop and set that to teal, save that. And now when we click into this input, you can see this nice teal underline. Okay, so that's all of our design done. Let's make sure it'll look good on really small screens, really big screens. So from this drop down here, I'm going to choose iPhone 5, which is a pretty small device, and it still looks good. I'm going to turn off this device mode and stretch this out. And it doesn't look that great on larger screens. Everything is a bit too spread out. So let's constrain the width of this page. So I'm going to jump down to the bottom of the template section and add some style tags. And we'll add the scoped prop. And let's target the Q page component. And we'll set the max width to 700 pixels. And we'll set the margin to 0 on the vertical and auto on the horizontal, which will force this to be in the middle. You can see everything is neatly aligned in the middle, and it looks a lot better on larger screens. Let's add some data and methods to make our app actually do something. Let's store the data for the counter and the counter name in a reactive object. So I'm going to jump to our script section here. I'm going to add a little block comment for our imports, and we need to import reactive from Vue. Let's add another little block comment here for everything related to our data. And we'll create a constant called data and set that equal to a reactive object. We'll add a property for our counter, set that to 0, and a property for the name, and set that to an empty string. Let's bind these properties to our counter and our Q input here. So let's scroll back up, And on the queue input here, I'm going to add a vModel directive and set that to data.name. And if we jump down to this number 23 here, we're going to replace that with double curly braces and data.counter, save that. And if we jump back down to our reactive object and change these, set the counter to 10 and stick something in the name, we can see these updated on the page. So let's set these back to an empty string and 0. Save that. Now let's create a method for increasing the counter when we click on this plus button. So I'm going to add another block comment here called counter methods. And we'll create a const here called increase counter. Set that equal to an arrow function. And all we want to do here is increase this data.counter property by 1. So we can just do data.counter ++. And let's trigger this method when this add button is clicked. So I'm just going to copy the name of that const, jump up to the add button, which is here, add a click handler, paste in that method name, save that. Let's see if that's working. Yep, that's working. Now let's jump back down to our methods. I'll duplicate this increase counter method, rename it to decrease counter. And this time we just want to reduce data.counter by 1. So we can just do data.counter -. Let's copy this method name, jump to the decrease button, which is here, add a click handler and trigger the decrease counter method, save that. And that's working, but it's letting us go below 0, which doesn't really make sense for a counter app. So let's fix that. Jump back down to the decrease counter method. And what we can do here is only fire this if the counter is greater than 0. So we can do if data.counter is greater than 0, then we'll do data.counter -. Save that. And it now won't let us go below 0. Okay, now we just need a reset method to reset the counter to 0 when we click on this button. So let's just duplicate this method here, rename it to reset counter. And all we want to do here is set data.counter equal to 0. Let's trigger this method when the reset button is clicked. And that's here. So at click, reset counter. Save that. Let's see if it's working. Yep, the reset button is working. Let's use one of Quasar's directives to allow us to increase or decrease the counter quickly if we tap and hold on one of these buttons. So I'm going to jump to the Quasar docs. We're going to go down to View Directives and touch repeat. Let's scroll down to the examples. And if we click and hold on this red button here, we can see the counter increasing. So let's click on View Source and grab the directive from that button, which is this one here. So I'll copy that and we'll jump to our increase counter button and paste in this touch directive. And this is basically going to trigger the method that's specified here every certain number of milliseconds as specified here. So in this case, it's going to fire the first time after the button has been held for 0 milliseconds. And then every time after that, it's going to trigger again after 100 milliseconds. We can chain these numbers for as long as we like. So what I want it to do is go pretty slowly for the first 4 increments and then go really fast after that. So I'm going to select these numbers here. And instead, I'm going to do 300 milliseconds for the first trigger, and then the same again for the second, third, and fourth. And then for every trigger after that, we're just going to wait for 50 milliseconds. And this mouse modifier means that it will be triggered when we use the mouse, which we want. But these enter and space modifiers mean that this will be triggered when we hold down the enter and space keys. And we don't want to do that, so I'm going to get rid of these modifiers. And the method that we want to trigger is this increase counter method. So let's stick that in there and save that and see how it looks. So if I click and hold this add button, it increases quite slowly for the first 4 and then goes really fast after that. So let's do the same for our decrease button. So let's copy this directive, jump to our decrease button, which is here, paste that in. And this time we're going to trigger the decrease counter method, save that. And we can see that's now working on both buttons. Let's use another Quasar directive so that we can control our counter by swiping up or down anywhere on our page. So I'll jump back to Quasar page. And this time we're going to use this touch pan directive. And I'll scroll down to this vertical example here. And if I click and drag up or down here, we can see this object that gets returned in the event object whenever we swipe up or down. And if you look at this delta y property here, you'll notice that whenever we click and drag down, this number is always positive. And whenever we click and drag up, this number is always negative. So let's jump to the view source button and let's copy this touchpan directive here. And we're going to add this to our queue page component at the top here. So let's split the attributes first and paste in this directive. Let's create this handle pan method. So jump down to our methods and I'm going to add another block comment here, which says touchpan. And we'll create a const called handle pan, set that equal to an arrow function. And we need to get the event object from this. So let's replace these parentheses with E. And remember, we're going to use this delta.y property. So for now, let's just log out e.delta.y, save that, jump back to our app. And if we swipe up on our page, we can see this number is always negative. And if we swipe down, we can see the number is always positive. So what we can do here in this handle pan method is if e.delta.y is less than 0, then we want to increase our counter so we can fire the increase counter method. Otherwise, else, we want to fire our decrease counter method. So let's save that and see if that's working. If I click and drag up, you can see the counter going up. And if I click and drag down, we can see the counter going down. Let's give our counter a name. So let's keep track of our butt scratches because too many of them can cause damage. So we want to keep this below 5. So let's set the counter to 3. Now, if I reload the page, or if this was a mobile app and we quit and restarted the app, you can see that we've lost our counter name and our counter. So let's use a watcher and Quasar's LocalStorage plugin to save our data and reload it whenever the app is restarted. So first of all, I'm going to add a watcher for our data reactive property. So first we need to import watch from Vue, and let's add our watcher here underneath the reactive object. So watch, and we're going to watch the data property. So for the first parameter, I'll put data, and for the second parameter, we're going to add a arrow function, which is going to return the value. So let's just log out the value for now and save that, reload. And if we make a change to the counter or the name, we can see our data object being logged out here with the latest values. So what we want to do is save this somewhere. And we can do that with Quasar's LocalStorage plugin. So let's jump to the Quasar site and we'll jump down to Quasar plugins and local/session storage. And if we scroll down to installation, we can see that we need to add local storage to the array of plugins in the quasar.config file. So let's jump to the quasar.config.js file in the root of our project. We can see the array of Quasar plugins here. We just need to add the local storage plugin and we can now use it. So back on the docs page, it shows us how to use it inside of a Vue file here. So first we need to import the use Quasar composable from Quasar. And then we need to assign that to a constant. And we can then get access to the local storage methods. So let's copy this import line, jump back to our index page, and I'll paste that import under this import. And I'm going to add another block comment here, which says Quasar. And we want to assign this use Quasar composable to a constant, set up a constant called $q and set that equal to use Quasar parentheses. And we can now use this localStorage.set method to store something in local storage. So let's copy that. Let's jump back to the watcher that we created, which is here, and paste in that set method. And this key parameter is the key where it'll be stored in local storage, and this should be a string. So we might as well call this data. And the second parameter is the data that we're going to store there. And we do want to store this value variable, so we can just leave that as it is and get rid of the console log. Save that. And if we jump back to our app, and in DevTools, if you go to application and then local storage here, we can see all of our local storage, and you can see there's nothing in there at the moment. But if we reload the page, and increase the counter and change the name, you can see that it's added this data property to our local storage. And if we click on that, we can see the data that it's saved here. We can see our counter and we can see our name property. However, if we reload the page, although it's saved our data, we also need to load this data into our app. So to load this data from local storage, we can just use this getItem method here. So let's copy that. And after our data object here, I'll paste that in. And we specify the key we want to get here, and we want to get the data key. Let's assign that to a constant. We could call it saved data. So when our app first starts up or it reloads, it's going to grab that data from local storage and store it in this constant. And now we can just use object assign to assign this data to our reactive object. But first we want to make sure there is some data. So what we can do is if save data, then we can do object.assign. And the first parameter is the object we want to assign something to, which is this data reactive object. So I'll put data for the first parameter, and the data we want to assign there is this saved data constant. So I'll stick that as the second parameter and save that. Let's see if this is working. So let's track the number of poos we've had today. Let's say we've had 13. We might want to go to the doctor if that's the case. But if we jump to the local storage panel, we can see the data there. And if we reload the page, we can see it's loaded all of our data. So our app is all working in the browser. Let's create an iOS app from it. So if we jump to the Quasar site and down to Quasar CLI, capacitor mode, preparation, let's jump down to iOS setup. So as it says here, you need a Mac with Xcode installed, and you might need to install CocoaPods. Let's scroll down a bit. So we can add the capacitor mode to our app firing this command, although we can actually just skip this step and fire this command here to start developing straight away in capacitor, iOS or Android mode. So I'm going to copy this command. I'm going to jump to my terminal, kill the dev process with Control-C, paste that in. We're going to run quasar dev-m for mode capacitor-t. We're going to replace this with iOS. So let's fire that, hit enter. So it's asking us for a capacitor app ID, and this needs to be unique if you're going to deploy your app to the App Store. So you can use a reverse domain style ID such as com.dannyconnell.quasarcounter, hit enter. And it says it's now opening up Xcode. And once Xcode is loaded, we can just choose a simulator from this drop down here. I'm going to choose iPhone 15. Then we can just click on this play button here, and it should open up the app in the simulator. And it's now opened up the iOS app in our simulator. One thing to note now is that Quasar has added this new folder to our project, Source Capacitor, where all of your capacitor related code, capacitor plugins and configuration will go. So let's see if this iOS app is working. Let's see if we can add a name. We can increase our counter and decrease our counter. Let's try the tap hold, and that's working. Let's try the touch and swipe, and that's working too in both directions. And let's try the reset button, and that's working as well. And let's make sure it's saving our data. So let's close the app and start it up again, and everything is working. Let's create an Android version of our app. So if we jump back to this capacitor preparation page and scroll to the top, you can see all of the installation steps for Android. So you need to install Android Studio and follow these installation steps. And you need to use this SDK manager tool to agree to some licenses. And you need to add the Android installation to your path. And that's all explained here. But then you can go to Android Studio, to this little menu here, and Virtual Device Manager. And you can set up a Android emulator here. I'm going to launch this Pixel 6 Pro emulator, and that's now popped up. So now we can just jump back to our terminal and kill the dev process from before. And we can just run the same command we ran before, except we want to change iOS to Android. And once our project is loaded in Android Studio, we can go to this drop down here, choose the device or emulator we want to run it on, and click on this play button. We can now see our app running on Android. And let's check it's all working. We can add a name, we can increase and decrease the counter. We can tap and hold to change the counter. We can reset the counter. We can swipe to change the counter. Let's make sure it's retaining our data. And everything is working on Android. Let's create a Mac version of our app. So to do this, we can just jump to the terminal and run Quasar dev-m electron. And bear in mind, if you run this on Windows, then it will launch the Windows version of your app. So let's launch this. And we now see the Mac version of our app. It's a little bit big. So let's reduce the dimensions of this window. And if we jump back to our project, we can see it's added a new folder here, source electron, where we can do all our electron related stuff, including adding native functionality and all that stuff. And this electron main.js is our main process file. We can set up some options for our browser window, which is what Electron calls the window that an app runs in here. So let's set this width property to 400, and we'll set the height to 400 as well. And I'm also going to add a max width of 400 and a max height of 400 so that this window can't be resized any bigger than those dimensions. And if you want to find all the available options, just Google Electron browser window. So let's save that. And it's now relaunched our app in this nice little window. And we can't make it any bigger than 400 by 400. Let's check it's working. We can increase and decrease the counter and add a name. We set the counter. We can swipe to adjust the counter. And if we quit this app with Command Q, launch it again with the same command, we can see it's preserved all of our data as well. Finally, let's create a Windows version of our app. And to build a Windows version on a Mac, we do need to jump into the quasar.config file, jump down to the packager section. We need to add an option here, and you can follow this link here to see all of the available options. But I will add the platform option and set this to Win32. And this will force it to build a Windows version. So let's save that, jump to our terminal, and instead of running Quasar dev-m electron, I'm going to run Quasar build so that it actually builds a Windows executable version of our app. Okay, it's finished building the Windows version, and it says here it's put it in the dist/electron folder in our project. So I'm going to jump over to Finder, Quasar counter, electron, packaged. We can see our Windows app here. There is our exe. To launch this on a Mac, you will need some sort of Windows virtual machine. You can use something like VirtualBox to launch a virtual machine for free, or I'm going to use an app called Parallels, which in my experience is a lot faster and a lot more reliable. So I'm going to jump to File Explorer, and to launch this app, the files do need to be on the virtual machine itself. So I've already copied the Windows app to a folder on this virtual machine. And if we just double click on quasarcounter.exe, we can now see our app. Let's check it's working. We can add a name. We can increase the counter or tap and hold to increase it fast. We can reset the counter, and we can swipe to adjust the counter. And if we quit this and relaunch it, all of our data is maintained. You can grab the finished source code for this app at makeappsacademy.com. You can also grab all of my courses here at the best prices. You can buy them individually, or you can join the membership and access all of my past, present and future courses and the Make Apps community. And if you do join the membership, the price you join at will be the price you stay at. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.